The NBA offseason is in full swing with the rumors and reports beginning to swirl, with the Philadelphia 76ers at the epicenter of everything and plenty of talking points surrounding what they will do with their draft pick and what is the future of this organization. Paul George's name has popped to the forefront. With so much money committed to the prize free agent edition this past offseason, would it be a mistake for the Sixers to attempt to move Paul George in order to officially start the rebuild? We do have a report for a team that is interested in trading for Paul George and taking on the money that he will require. I want to talk through whether this would make sense from a Sixers perspective and where my head is at on all of these trade talks overall. Now, before I dive fully into, do want to remind you guys, as always, to make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. That at this point in time, only 31.5% of you guys watching these videos have subscribed to us here at Sixers Digest. The rumors are heating up, the excitement is building, and we got a lot more to get into. So want as many of you guys as possible a part of this Sixers Digest family. Now, to dive into the report that did spark this today, we do have from Airy_report, and to set kind of the tune here, there tends to be every summer this new insider that pops out of nowhere that tends to get a little bit of action. And these relationships and these rumors are sort of, there's more unique pathways to come across them than ever before, that oftentimes agencies are very responsible for the leaks, that if you do have relationships behind the scenes with some of these guys, you can kind of carve out a career for yourself. And that does feel to be what is happening right here. This dude, Airy Report, has hit on a couple things already and recently tweeted, sources, the Brooklyn Nets have held internal discussions about moving up in the draft and are open to acquiring the number 3 pick from Philadelphia by including assets, and would be willing to take on Paul George's long-term salary in a trade. Now, Paul George has been an interesting case here in Philadelphia. I think I'm a little bit softer on him than the majority, with my personal perception being he was brought here to be Robin and then asked to be Batman. That he was here to be a sidekick to Joel Embiid, to be that third piece of that star trio with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. And ultimately, if we're going to assign blame for where the season fell apart, the lion's share has to fall on Joel Embiid's shoulders. Now, this is not to say that I do believe that Paul George will ever bounce back and be a max contract player. I think it is fair to assess that it was an overpay from the Sixers' perspective, but nonetheless, this is still a guy that's a better basketball player than a lot of times that he has talked about. And to reflect on what exactly he brought to the team this season, that Paul George averaged 16.2 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, 4.3 assists, shot 43% from the field, 35.8% from three, only 27.7% from the corner. He shot just 20% on open catch and shoot three-point looks. He did battle injuries throughout. There's plenty to nitpick and critique in regards to Paul George's season, but we got to look long-term and look towards the future. Now, the biggest part of this conversation is obviously the contract, and for Paul George specifically, that the Sixers were the only team to step to the table in the past offseason and hand him a full-scale, 4-year, $212 million max contract. Now, obviously, one season of that is in the books and went about as poor as we could possibly imagine. So still remaining, he's due $51.6 million this coming season, $54.1 million the following year, and $56.5 million a player option in the 27-28 season. Now, where my hesitancy gets from a starting point in regards to moving Paul George is you certainly are not maximizing the asset here, that you are trading him at a low point in what his reputation is. And I also think in this specific case that he continues to get more valuable the more time you let expire off this deal. That teams are going to be much more willing to swallow 2 years of Paul George than is the case for 3 years of Paul George, or the full scale 4 years, which would have been the case last year, as there was beginning to be a little bit of buzz about a midseason trade and movement as the season fully eroded there. But with Paul George specifically, I don't think the stock price will get lower than it is right now, and that is why, sort of in my mindset, I lean towards running it back and giving him another opportunity. Now, when having the entire conversation regarding the Sixers team, there is a ton to get into. Now, to bring up the Nets report once again, do want to highlight that they want that third pick. So the Nets seem to be circling and wanting to move up in the draft. One of my key principles that I've felt throughout this entire offseason is I do want the Sixers to walk away with a top-end talent, a guy that can be a part of the long-term youthful core that quietly this organization has already turned a page to. Tyrese Maxey, who, by the way, the conversation points getting a bit disrespectful about Tyrese Maxey on the timeline. I do want to dive deeper into that in a separate video, but to keep it on the trade conversations here, Tyrese Maxey, just 24 years old or 25 years old, a bright future ahead of him and a guy that I still think is continuing to progress in a major way to the level that he's not quite getting the credit for. Jared McCain, obviously, we saw the brief stretch which he absolutely set the world on fire in a Sixer uniform, would have been the clear-cut rookie of the year if he had remained healthy. Obviously, that meniscus tear did take it from him. They made the trade for Quentin Grimes at 24 years old, and there's other pieces in the mix, the Adem Bonas, the Justin Edwards, that there has been quietly this little youth movement with this Sixers team. It is important to me to add to this with this specific draft, but that doesn't mean I'm as locked in to staying with the third pick. I think it is pretty universally viewed that there is not that large of a gap between the third pick and guys in the 6 to 8 range. It does feel like the draft fully starts at the Sixers, and if there's a team like the Brooklyn Nets that very much desire to get up, move up, and get a specific player at 3, there is a world where the Sixers could capitalize on this. Now, when take a peek at the mock draft overall, obviously the Sixers, this being about from NBADraft.net, has them projected VJ Edgecombe. And there's been quite a debate between Edgecombe and Ace Bailey. There's a couple other names that have entered the conversation, the Trey Johnsons, the Con Knipples. Knipples certainly picking up a ton of momentum, and a guy that tested really well athletically, which is a bit of a surprise and unexpected there. Could change the way the teams viewed him. That he had a quicker lateral time than VJ Edgecombe. He had a higher vertical jump than Ace Bailey. That is a surprise for Con Knipple there, and could change, once again, how teams do perceive his overall ceiling. But for the Sixers specifically here, you kind of are checking a couple different boxes. Obviously, I mentioned this youth movement, but there still is the reality that they are invested in Joel Embiid and Paul George. And when we just had this conversation about Paul George and the value of the contract, it's a very different story with Joel Embiid. I really don't think there's a team out there that at this current point in the game is signing up to take on this contract. And to dive into the multi-year breakdown of what this looks like for Embiid, and you can see the entire Sixers roster, that Embiid next season, do $55 million. $59 million estimate, depending on what the cap situation is, because it is a full-scale max that he's earned every penny of. In the 26-27 season, we'll be making roughly $59.5 million. In the 27-28 season, he'll be making $64 million as an estimate. And then the 28-29 season, he has a player option for $69 million, Joel Embiid does. For all the concerns and all the critiques that we have about Joel Embiid, the lack of availability, the concern of can he bounce back to his MVP self, every other team has those same exact questions. And if you're trying to move on and change and go to this new era, I don't see any world in which the return on that is something remotely comparable to what his level of talent is. The best case scenario for what Joel Embiid can be this year is so much higher than what the best case scenario would be in a trade, if that is even possible at this point in the game. And when having that conversation about Joel Embiid is directly tied to the Paul George conversation, because you brought Paul George in to pair with Joel. And if you're making the bet, if you're making the gamble on Joel Embiid is bouncing back, that we believe he has at least one more season of being a top-end talent in the NBA, then why would you move on from Paul George at this point? They kind of don't have a chance other than to make that bet. And I do think that we could have a very different tone when discussing this next offseason. But based on all the work that was put in to bring in Paul George, I don't really see the advantage of trying to get off the money if you're still committed to the Joel Embiid vision. If this is a full-scale blow-up, a full-scale rebuild, it's a bit of a different tune for me, but I think the direction that the Sixers are electing to go is give this one more chance this season, and then we can really evaluate things. I'm still game with potentially to move around in the draft and things like that, but I don't quite see the appeal of a flip with Cam Johnson and Paul George and it being that advantageous to the Sixers team. And to dive into what Johnson brings to the table here, that he is a guy that you certainly can see the vision, and I do think is kind of wasting there in Brooklyn. He averaged 18.8 points per game last season, 4.3 rebounds, 3.4 assists, shot 47.5% from the field, 39% from three, still 29 years old, and I would like to see him saved by a contender. I even could talk myself into him being a part of this Sixers team in addition to Paul George, which there are some interesting cap kind of moves that they can potentially work out there. Yossi Gosselin did a nice job breaking that out and has him circled as a potential Sixers target, but that is in the future here. For the current point, I don't mind the Sixers exploring ways to move around, but if the gamble is we're trying this one more time with Joel Embiid, I don't really see the vision for moving on from Paul George at this current point. Again, it could be a very different tune and a very different conversation this time next offseason, but that sort of feels like the outlook from the organizational standpoint and just what makes some common sense right now. Do want to hear from you guys if you hardcore disagree with me in the comments. If you do you believe this is a complete sunk cost in regards to Paul George, and anything you can get, you should get. I just am not quite there with Paul. I think that he certainly did not play his best last year, but I do think there's a world there. If you suck it up, take another season, let another year erode off that contract, and he plays marginally better next season, that there's going to be a significantly different type of outlook, and you can at least get somewhat equal value back in a potential trade. Teams are always looking for wings. We're about to see what Desmond Bane got on the trade market. We're about to see what Kevin Durant is going to fetch on the trade market here. There are bodies moving across the NBA, but I don't quite think Paul George is going to be one of them, even though it is a bit appealing to hear Brooklyn willing to take on that contract. But let me know what you guys think about all that in the comments here. As always, appreciate you guys for tuning in. And one more time, doing remind you guys to make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. Once again, 68.5% of you guys watching these videos have not subscribed to us here at Sixers Digest just yet. A lot more exciting things to get into on the channel, and want as many of you as possible along for the ride. So appreciate you guys tuning in one more time, and be back. Talk with you next time. Peace.